our testing infrastructure is far more robust than it was in the spring. Our employers have adopted the guidance we issued to keep their employees and customers safe. And schools do remain open despite the continued presence of COVID. Now, study after study makes clear that kids need to be in school. Their educational and emotional development depends on it. And while in-person learning is especially challenging during this time, many schools have found a way to get it done. Relying on state guidance as well as federal and state funding, many state special education programs, early education providers, and some school districts have been able to make in-person education work safely since the fall. The Commonwealth's parochial schools, many of which serve primarily Black and brown children and their families in many high-risk communities, have been delivering mostly in-person education to over 45,000 kids since mid-August. Many teachers, parents, and staff throughout Massachusetts are making it happen, and we should be justifiably proud of their work. To encourage more public school districts to reopen their classrooms, we've been working with a number of lab partners to develop a weekly COVID testing program for kids, teachers, and staff. The goal is to get as many kids as possible back into the classroom as soon as possible. And this first-in-the-nation COVID testing program will help more school districts make the call to offer full-time in-person instruction now. On Beacon Hill, our colleagues in the legislature overcame some very difficult operational challenges and managed to debate and enact critical legislation on a wide range of issues. Some of that legislation provided much-needed short-term relief to our citizens, while other bills will position the Commonwealth for a bright post-pandemic future. To provide immediate relief, tax filing and payment dates were extended on several occasions to give residents and employers more time to meet their obligations. Without raising taxes or fees, together, we funded essential state and local services, including education, social services, public health, and public safety. We also included additional funds for small business supports, rental assistance, and food support. And with an eye toward the future, we worked with our colleagues in the legislature to enact legislation on transportation, economic development, housing, healthcare, and police reform. The horrific murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis brought the issue of systemic racism to the forefront of our national dialogue, and it forced important conversations here in the Commonwealth. Thankfully, we did more than just have a conversation. We acted and passed one of the most comprehensive police reform laws in the country. The new law bans chokeholds, limits no-knock warrants, and creates a new independent state entity with the power to establish policing standards, certify law enforcement officers, investigate allegations of misconduct, and suspend or revoke certification. I'm so proud to be able to say that these reforms were discussed, debated, and passed here without the rancor, and in many cases the lack of progress, that dominated this discussion in so many other places. And we've also been a national leader on healthcare, and the healthcare reform law enacted by the legislature at the end of the session makes services like telehealth, which were a key part of our pandemic response, permanent. Telehealth visits, online or over the phone, were made possible by an emergency order we issued last spring. And patients and clinics took full advantage. People who used to put off that clinician visit because they were busy flocked to this service. Over 1 million visits in less than 9 months. It was convenient and safe, and it kept people healthy and out of the emergency room. But it wasn't permanent. Well, now it is, and we'll all benefit from the flexibility and availability of this critical service. On transportation, the new law accelerates bridge reconstruction so we can move faster to modernize every bridge that needs major repairs. It also provides the funding we need to complete the South Coast Rail expansion. Now, Fall River and New Bedford have been waiting for over 30 years for this to get done. It will now be available in 2023. This law also funds the final piece of the long-promised Green Line extension into Somerville. These are big promises made and kept. just in time for the $600 million economic development bill, which will help us invest in our post-pandemic recovery. Resources here will help small businesses, support investments in struggling downtowns, create housing people need and can afford, and put people to work. I want to give a special shout out to the legislature for including the housing choice legislation that we filed several years ago. This will reform our exclusionary zoning rules, which have stymied housing production in the Commonwealth for decades. Communities can now move forward much more quickly to permit and build the housing that we all know we need. On climate change, Massachusetts continues to be a national leader. In the last several weeks alone, we put forth a science-based roadmap to reach net zero emissions by 2050, and we spearheaded a first-of-its-kind multi-state program to reduce carbon emissions in the transportation sector. We've invested over $935 million in climate change mitigation and adaptation since we took office, and we're on track to meet our commitment to invest $1 billion in climate action by 2022. Partnering with the legislature, we secured historic clean energy procurements at the lowest price for ratepayers, and this set the table for an explosion in offshore wind development up and down the east coast of this country. There's no question more needs to be done on environmental justice, transportation, resiliency, conservation, and energy efficiency, and we look forward to working with our legislative colleagues to make this happen. Now, as we come out of the pandemic, one issue we need to get right is the future of work. Many people have gotten used to working remotely and may not want to come back to the office 5 days a week. Businesses big and small have learned how to attract new customers and support their existing ones without physically being with them. Virtual conferences have replaced in-person ones, and many companies have found ways to recruit and train new employees all remotely. Everything from business travel to training, recruiting, and sales have undergone massive transformation and will continue to adapt and evolve. These discoveries have big consequences for how people commute, where they live, where they work, and who they work for. And this will impact commercial centers, downtowns, transportation, and public spaces. It's critical that we understand this and lean into what this reset means, so that we create the community building, housing, economic development, and transportation programs that align with these changes. Make no mistake, we've always lived by our wits, figured out the future and got there first, and this time will be no different. Finally, I want to talk about the light at the end of this dark tunnel, vaccines. Thankfully, the scientific community, many from right here in Massachusetts, came through and created highly effective, thoroughly tested, and safe vaccines, and people are now being vaccinated. Vaccinating 4 million adults in Massachusetts as the doses are allocated by the federal government is not going to be easy. But be assured we'll make every effort to get this done as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Common sense says that we should prioritize the most vulnerable among us and those who keep our healthcare system operating, and we can only move as fast as the federal government delivers the vaccine. Everyone has shown tremendous patience throughout this long ordeal, and many are justifiably running out of it. I am too, and that's why this can't happen fast enough. By the end of this week, we'll have 103 vaccination sites open to the public with the ability to administer about 240,000 doses each week. And by mid-February, we'll have 165 public sites, including 7 mass vaccination sites, and altogether, we'll have capacity to administer approximately 305,000 doses every week. From large-scale facilities at stadiums to local sites at health clinics, we're working to reach vulnerable populations and get as many people protected as soon as doses are delivered to the Commonwealth. Beginning tomorrow, people over the age of 75 can make an appointment to receive their first dose. Please visit mass.gov/COVID vaccine to find out when you're eligible and to book an appointment when it's your turn. I know that a great deal has been asked of you over the past 11 months, And I'm grateful for the endless sacrifices so many of you have made in order to keep your family and your friends and your neighbors safe. The end is in sight, but for the next few months, we must continue to stay vigilant and take the steps that we all know to stop the spread. But know this, we will beat this virus, and life will begin to return to normal. Now, before I close, I want to offer some thoughts on the mood of the nation and the events of the past year. I can't recall in my brief time on Earth anything quite like this. I'm sure historians, with the benefit of time and hindsight, will have a lot more to say about it than whatever I might say tonight. I know a lot of us watched a lot of TV over the past year. The pandemic drove us inside, and the streaming services and cable networks took full advantage of that. Well, the show that sticks with me is Ted Lasso. It's positive, charming, heartfelt, and subtle. Big high fives to Saturday Night Live's Jason Sudeikis. I won't bore you with the details, but there was a moment in that show when Ted turns down the volume in a tense encounter and quotes a Walt Whitman phrase he saw on a banner at his son's high school. All it said was, "Be curious, not judgmental." He goes on to talk about how curious people learn things they didn't know, while judgmental people learn not much at all. And then he sticks the landing. I've talked a lot over the past 6 years about collaboration and respect, about seeking common ground, about focusing on the issues and not on the personalities. And I get that it's harder to collaborate and it's harder to show respect in a time of high anxiety and trauma. But I would suggest that it's more important during times like these to ask questions, to be curious, to show empathy, and to maintain an open mind than it is to make brash statements and name call. Social media, too many politicians and too many talking heads thrive on takedowns and judgments. It's become the source of so much anger and hatred in this world that I often wish I could just shut it all off for a month and see what happens. Over time, too much of our daily discourse has come to resemble it. Not curious, just judgmental. In the end, this makes it harder for us to understand one another, to learn from one another, and most importantly, to grow. My interest in filing a police accountability bill came from conversations with people whose life experiences were different than mine. I listened, I learned, and I grew. Besides putting COVID in the rearview mirror once and for all, my biggest wish for 2021 is for all of us to take Walt Whitman's charge to heart. Be curious, not judgmental. If we do, I believe we will all grow. And hopefully we'll all learn a few things we didn't know before and be glad that we did. We'll also be happier and healthier and can use our newfound knowledge and understanding to work together to build a better, stronger Commonwealth as we come out of this awful pandemic. I want to thank you for watching, and God bless this Commonwealth, and God bless the United States of America. Good night.